No Time to Die's villain is one of the most boring ones I've ever seen, and I think it's because the film creates a perfect storm for dullness, where everything comes together to make the kind of villain whose name you didn't just forget, you never bothered to remember it at all. I mean, you've got Zemo from Civil War, right? Guy left a massive impression, everyone remembers his name, and you got Le Chiffre too, who could forget him? But then you got No Time to Die's villain, whose name is, Safin. His name's Safin, apparently. Really, while there is a lot about No Time to Die that is genuinely good, its villain is easily its weakest area, and he really lets the film down. And one of the big reasons why is all to do with motivation. For the first half of the film, Safin makes total sense and works well enough, despite the fact he isn't on screen. He wants revenge. Not the most creative motivation out there, but it's a tried and tested classic. It's a fine choice. But then, once he gets that revenge by destroying Spectre, he decides to kidnap Bond's girlfriend because he has a crush on her, and also he wants to become an arms dealer and sell nanobot weapons to other bad guys.
Our first buyers are arriving.
But also he wants to release these nanobots and commit genocide against a few million people. The movie, by the way, at no point says or even implies who these people might be or how their deaths are for the greater good.
The greater good.
All we get is Safin saying these suitably generic villain things of how he wants the world to be.
Hi, dear.
And
I want the world to evolve, yet you want it to stay the same.
All of which are impossibly vague statements which tell us exactly nothing. How will it be tidier? Is he killing all of the convicted murderers in the world? Maybe? Or is he just killing all of the serial litterers and fly tippers out there and literally making the world tidier? Also, maybe? And how is the world evolving in Safin's grand genocidal plan? It is never said, and do you want to know what's really impressive here? We've been talking about this guy for about 2 minutes, and already we've put more effort into thinking about this villain than the writers did. Safin wants revenge for his dead family, and has a huge crush on Leia Saduku, and is an aspiring arms dealer, and wants to create an ambiguously explained new world order. Here's the thing, it's possible for people in real life to have more than one motivation, but in fiction you do that, and it runs the risk of the story really getting quite messy. When you look at the best villains, all too often they want just one thing. Thanos, for example, his motivation is very simple and clean. Or Zemo, he believes the Avengers killed his family, so he wants to destroy them. That's it. Zemo might go about that motivation in an extremely elaborate way, but the core reason behind it all can be said in just one sentence. It simply is the truth. Your villain having one motivation is plenty enough, and giving them multiple, let alone 4, while that could theoretically work, it runs the risk of making that villain and your story unfocused. And also, as a topic I want to cover more on this channel because it gets way too little coverage, it makes it way harder to execute a great theme. Great villains, like great protagonists, have their desires/beliefs complement the theme of the story, and importantly, the fact that different characters believe different things should be the cause of the conflict in that story. We video essayists bring up The Dark Knight literally every third video we make, and there's a great reason why. It's like a control to compare everything with, as it does pretty much everything right, especially this. Fundamentally, The Dark Knight's asking the question, are people inherently good, or are people inherently bad? The movie does a stellar job at exploring that question, and it reaches the conclusion that it's both. Some people are incorruptible, yet some others are easily corrupted. Some people are truly good inside, despite having done evil things, and some people are truly evil inside, despite having done good things. It's a wonderful exploration of the question, but it's the hero-villain dynamic, the dynamic that No Time to Die entirely lacks, that is the beating heart of this whole aspect of the story. Batman believes all people, deep down, have the potential for good, and Joker believes that everyone will become evil if pushed hard enough. Despite the fact it has fistfights and car chases, it's the fact the two characters have these competing, extreme views of the world that is the heart of the conflict in the movie, and really, the two of them aren't just fighting, they're having a debate. Like, the Joker could shoot Batman as he rides towards him, but instead, he invites Batman to kill him, because if he can get Batman, of all people, to break bad, the Joker's philosophy is proven to be the right one. And that is a thing so fantastic that in his eyes, it's well worth dying for. This is a part of the reason why the horribly, horribly overused cliche of the villain saying,
You and I are not so different.
exists, because it's basically the writer grabbing the audience by the shirt and screaming in the least subtle way possible. Did you guys see how well I wrote this hero-villain dynamic? Do you guys appreciate how good a writer I am? Love me, please. This isn't to say that using the line,
We're not so different, you and I,
is inherently awful. It's not. Like any cliche, there was once a time where you could use it and get away with it. But it's so worn out, so overdone, that it's really hard to use it in a way where it doesn't do more harm than good. And under no circumstances, would any decent writer in this day and age have the villain say, we're not so different, you and I, right? And it's a good thing that at the very least, No Time to Die didn't use this cliche, right? Right?
License to kill. Vendetta with Ernst Blofeld in love with Madeline Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection.
What have you done? Like, it's impossible. It's actually impossible that the writers didn't realise they were playing into the single most tired cliche in all of villain writing. But despite the fact it is a horribly hackneyed line to say, it could have conceivably worked. If they genuinely were mirror opposite characters, it wouldn't have been a great line, but it could have worked okay. But the worst part is they aren't mirror opposites, because not only are Bond's and Safin's similarities extremely surface level, at no point in the movie, apart from the cliched line,
You and me, we not so different,
is any effort made to draw attention to their similarities. Now, Joker and Batman, those two are mirror opposites. Moriarty and Sherlock, those two have a lot in common, but never James Bond and bloody Freddie Mercury over there. Just because characters share a handful of not even traits, just things in common, like they have killed people and they love the same person, that does not make them the same. Based on these writers' beliefs, it would make just as much sense for a character to say to someone,
Ah, I see we both have brown hair and enjoy listening to K-pop. We're not so different, you and I. Ah, I see we both own this rare collectible copy of Hannah Montana Spotlight World Tour for the Nintendo Wii. And there is a niche mukbang YouTuber whom the both of us are subscribed to. We're not so different, you and I.
Sure, it's technically true. There are some things these characters share in common, in the same way that if you pick two random people from the population, they will also have things in common. But on a thematic level, this statement is empty. There is nothing this story has on a deeper level to back this up. The ultimate reason why this line just doesn't work isn't the fact it's cliche, it's how they're trying to convince the audience that Safin is a great foil for Bond's character, when in reality, he couldn't be a worse one. Truly great villains aren't interchangeable. It feels odd referencing the first video I ever made on this channel, but in that one, I make the point that if you look at the dynamic between Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, it would entirely fall apart if Moriarty was replaced with nearly any other villain like Red Skull, or Voldemort, or Zemo from the MCU, because those villains are a pretty miserable foil for Sherlock. Moriarty is an iconic villain, not because he himself is a great character, but because he does an outstanding job at challenging our protagonist Sherlock. Moriarty challenges him in the literal sense by pushing his wits to their limits, and he challenges him in a more ideological one, as truly the two men are reflections of each other. In fact, they're so similar, the only difference they have is that one believes they should help the world with their talents, while the other believes he should use his talents for personal gain. If you take Sherlock Holmes and replace his philanthropic tendencies with extreme callousness, you get Moriarty. The exact same can be said for Killmonger to Black Panther 2. Good villains are tailor-made for their protagonists, and a great litmus test for you to find out whether your villain is a good one is to try swapping them out for other villains in fiction and seeing if your story still works. It's downright impossible to imagine a Silence of the Lambs where Hannibal Lecter isn't giving Clarice all of his advice. Or Percy from The Green Mile. He's such a privileged, cruel twat, and he is a perfect fit for the role that movie needs his character to fill. Meanwhile, with No Time to Die, Safin's motivation is so generic, his dynamic with Bond so non-existent, you could replace him with so many other villains in fiction and it would still work. Like, you could replace him with Dr. Evil and the story would still hold up. It's that bad. But on top of Safin's motivations being unfocused, on top of his chemistry with Bond being non-existent, this movie falls for a major mistake that has ruined so many good stories. And in order to realise it, let's look at Blofeld's character in No Time to Die. So here's the context. Blofeld just tried to kill Bond, however it totally backfired and all of Blofeld's underlings and Spectre died. A few scenes after this, Blofeld, as an act of kindness, tells him that Bond was wrong, that Madeleine never betrayed him in the prologue, giving them a chance to reconcile.
Madeleine didn't do a thing, it was all me. I knew you'd come visit it. She led you straight there, from the goodness of her heart.
Here's the question. Why on earth would Blofeld say that? Like, Bond has not only already imprisoned Blofeld and ruined his schemes in the prior movie, but he just helped kill all of Spectre. Like, there is no one in the world this man should hate more than Bond. We even see that earlier in the movie when he lures Bond to that party to kill him purely out of spite. So why does Blofeld help him and his love get back together? It's not just a case of him having no motivation to say it, it's how he has an incredible motivation to not say it, because keeping his mouth shut on this is a great way to screw James over. Or maybe even the opposite. Maybe he could rub it in and lie about how Madeleine gladly sold him out, how little she loved him in the end. And that's what makes Bond lose his temper and grab his neck. Like, if Blofeld had done that, it would have messed up the plot somewhat, but it would have made Blofeld feel like a real, dynamic, fun character, as opposed to the narrative puppet he is. While the audience might not consciously notice Blofeld's motivations not adding up with his actions at all, they most certainly do on a subconscious one, and as a result, they aren't compelled by his character. If Blofeld had instead been full of rage and hate in this prison scene, it would have made this whole interaction a genuinely great addition to the film. It could have been a brilliant scene. But because he acts so out of character, after all he has to, how else will James get the chance to reconcile with the love interest? Because he acts so out of character, this scene and Blofeld's whole character is a shadow of what it could have been. I've heard some people complain that when they killed Blofeld off, it broke the fourth wall because it was dead obvious the writers were ticking off a checklist to tie off all of this franchise's loose ends. And that's because they were. But I reckon if this scene had its villain's motivations really add up, a lot like a magician doing a great job at masking the method of his trick, the sheer entertainment value of Blofeld and Bond really having at it, that would have done a great job at hoodwinking the audience, at stopping people from realising what the writers were up to. Here's a quick clip of the author, Brandon Sanderson, talking about this very issue.
Writers are very similar to stage magicians. A stage magician's job is to keep you distracted by one thing while they're doing something with their hand over here. This is where the characters feel like they are simply following a plot rather than being people. But this is also, at its core, a motivation problem. You are not staying true to your character motivations in that point. You probably have gotten your motivations across, and then you are having the characters seemingly betray their motivations for the good of the plot. This is one of those things they notice, even if they can't put a finger on why or what exactly is happening, they notice it. And so you, as an author, your job is to make these things invisible.
Once you're aware of this problem, you'll truly see it everywhere. It's a depressingly common writer mistake. One example that springs to mind here is Batman suddenly becoming best buddies with Superman at the end of BVS. Not because he's undergone a character arc or anything that makes sense, but because the outline said they had to go from worst enemies to great friends at this plot point, so they did. That is why the internet collectively mocked that Martha moment when the film came out. It felt forced. And speaking of choices feeling forced, let's look at Safin. Towards the end of the movie, Safin wants to keep Madeleine, Bond's girlfriend, hostage on the island for the rest of her life because he has a great big crush on her. However, she's just escaped from his custody, yet he still has a trick up his sleeve. He still has her daughter captive. You know, the one with the suspiciously blue eyes. Like, seriously, like, look at them. Like, just look at those things. Like, they're so blue, it's ridiculous. It's like she belongs in Arrakis. Like, seriously, come on. But anyway, Safin has her hostage. If Safin were a real person with the motivations scenes that have been set up, what would he do in this situation? Well, it's obvious. He'd use the daughter for leverage to force Madeleine to surrender to him in return for her safety. Instead, he does this.
Off you go.
Why did Safin let her go? For no other reason than the writers worked themselves into a corner, couldn't think of a way to have them rescue the kid with their outline, so they had him let her go. Despite the fact he didn't just have no motivation to do so, he had every motivation to not do so. As a result, it shatters the illusion that Safin is a real person, just like that prison scene did for Blofeld. In short, the writers were lazy. And that is a really cruel critique to make, I know, it's a nasty thing to say, but at the same time, it's demonstrably true, because it would have been so easy to fix this scene. Literally give me 10 seconds and I'll do it. How about we have the same scene, the kid bites his hand, making him drop her, but then she flees into an open vent, or, some open hatch, and it's too small for Safin's goons to fit through, so Safin gets all mad, but he's got no choice but to carry on, and then the kid reunites with her parents through the vents. There you go. I probably wouldn't use that scene myself, because it still feels a tad contrived, but it's a lot better. You've got a near identical scene that serves the exact same function, except this time Safin doesn't go against his motivations. But then this whole issue just gets so much worse, because in Safin's final confrontation with Bond, he ambushes Bond and shoots him in the back. This is good. How is Bond going to survive this one? It creates real dread here. But then the audience thinks, how is Bond going to survive this one? Safin has Bond wounded and at gunpoint. It's over, right? He's won. But wait, why is Safin walking towards him? No, just stand still, you idiot. What are you doing? Just don't move your legs. Do not move your legs and you have won the movie. Just stand still. Why are you walking? Oh, that's why. Safin had to walk towards him because the writers, yet again, worked their way into a corner and didn't know how else the hero could survive the situation. So the villain, who, has successfully organised a heist against a high-security, MI6 facility, so he's been displayed to be quite like a genius guy, decides to be a clumsy idiot, waste his advantage, and walk up to Bond because that was the only way Bond could have survived. How can the audience be compelled by a villain who so routinely makes contrived, nonsensical choices, who is so transparently not a real person with real thoughts and feelings, but a puppet? We can tell that much from the visible strings attached to him. What makes Safin worse is how he isn't present at all for the first half of the movie, and that's a criminal mistake. I do get where they're coming from though, because wouldn't it be fun to have a villain who we only hear about for the first half of the movie, but then at the halfway point he gets revealed? In theory, it adds to the mystique around them. The issue with that idea, and I don't want to label the cliche, is how show don't tell exists for a reason. It generally is better storytelling to show a villain rather than having others tell us about him. This includes fleshing out a villain's motivation, a mistake that only made Safin more forgettable. A great example of this done well is Casino Royale. That film does, I hesitate to say this word, but I think it's earned, that film does a perfect job at setting up what drives Le Chiffre. We see how he's borrowed millions from the African warlord and has lost it all betting against the stock market. The movie really takes its time here to get you to understand what drives the villain. So when he plays poker against Bond to win back the money and pay his debts, we totally get where he's coming from, giving his character the foundation that's vital for making any villain compelling. In the middle of the game too, when the warlord attacks him in the hotel room and says, "Where is my money?" it only gets across the desperation that drives his character even more. Skyfall doesn't do this as well as Casino Royale, but what we got is plenty nonetheless. The film gives us a nice long monologue where Silver explains how Em abandoned him in the field, how he genuinely trusted her, and she betrayed him, handing him over to the Chinese. And it does a wonderful job at getting the audience to entirely get what he wants in the story, revenge on Em, and precisely why he wants it. I suppose this isn't true for every good villain, but it is for most of them. A good way to think about your villain's motivation is to ask, how can you give the audience a chance to understand what it feels like to be in that villain's shoes? And doing so in such a way, well, we can't help but feel if we had a crazed warlord demanding his money back from us, we'd do whatever the hell we could to pay them back. We don't need to agree with the villain, but it goes a long way to making your villain a great one if you can get the audience to empathise with them at the very least. What we got for Le Chiffre and Silver, it's a major component of why they're so fun to watch. And we never got that for Safin. Not once. We never see his family get killed, he never gives out a compelling speech as to why he's out for revenge. The only thing we get out of his mouth along these lines is this.
My name is Lucifer Safin. Your husband killed my family.
The fact it is just one line is bad enough. The fact they muffled it even worse. But that Safin isn't even on camera when he's given his brief chance to explain his motivations is yet more damning proof that the creators put very little care, if any at all, into their villain. Okay, to be fair, 2/3 of the way into the film, Madeleine does tell us that Safin's family died with some pictures, but considering how Safin isn't the one explaining this, it makes it come across as detached. Like, instead of being an entertaining, emotional backstory, it's more of a PowerPoint presentation that we have to slog through. Not to mention how he's already achieved his revenge motivation by this point in the movie, so this information feels redundant when it comes to. It's not terribly well done. We needed this to come way earlier in the film, and we needed to hear it from Safin's own mouth. Look, here's a quick suggestion for a better way to do this movie. What if we alter Safin's backstory so he's actually the heir to some big criminal dynasty, something like the Yakuza? Bond is tasked with hunting the man down because he's stolen these dangerous nanobots from MI6, but then quarter way into the film, we have Safin capture Bond and tie him to a chair. Safin then explains his backstory and fleshes out how sympathetic his motivations are. He says his family caused a lot of problems for Spectre back in the day, constantly undermining their evil schemes. So then Spectre killed Safin's entire family in this horrible massacre. And we say something like, he got his facial scars from a burn where he was staying inside his burning mansion, trying to wake his dead mother up. Really get the audience to feel, hold on, Safin wants nothing more than to avenge his dead loved ones by taking down Spectre, an organisation of pure evil. Like, what's wrong with that? And then the two of them genuinely iron out, so much so that Safin then cuts Bond loose and they work together to take out Spectre once and for all. The enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of deal. And Safin gives his word that once they've destroyed Spectre, he'll give all of these nanobots back to MI6 because he has no need for them anymore. This could be like a fun twist that subverts the traditional Bond formula because, hold on a second, what, like the big charismatic baddie is actually a good person? What? And so then the two of them take down Spectre, they succeed, but then at the midpoint, this is where things start to get really wacky. Remember in the marketing how they did all of that bigging up around Madeleine having a terrible secret?
We all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet.
And when her secret finds its way out, and it will, it'll be the death of you.
Well, we have it yield some oh-so-lovely fruit as Blofeld, disgruntled with how James has killed his entire organisation, knowing that Safin is watching, reveals that Madeleine was secretly an invaluable member of Spectre back in the day. Maybe it was her first task as a Spectre agent as she was spying on Safin's house, but once the massacre happened she realised how evil they were and decided to quit. But Blofeld reveals that Madeleine, in some capacity, is genuinely responsible for the death of Safin's family. Now, all of a sudden, the last half of the movie clicks together so much better as we've set up that Bond loves Madeleine and her daughter with the suspiciously blue eyes, and Madeleine is truly remorseful for her past evil deed. But Safin has a sympathetic motivation too, and the three of them clash, with Bond struggling to forgive Madeleine while also trying to protect his newfound family and trying to balance those two, and Safin's out to avenge his dead family too. We feel for all of them. Then we have the climax where the daughter gets captured and Safin, being a man of honour, says that if Madeleine hands herself over to him, he promises the child will be fine. He only wants to hurt those responsible. Madeleine accepts the offer. She accepts responsibility for her crimes and chooses to go to die. But then James finds out about this whole thing and is like, screw it, and so then he independently goes into Safin's lair to try and rescue Madeleine in this whole deal. One thing leads to another, Madeleine gets rescued in her cell by Bond, and we have this emotional chat where Bond and Madeleine, they reconcile over this whole issue. Safin, however, sees this and he hatches a plan. He orders a new strain of nanobots to be created, ones made to kill Madeleine, and he orders them to be put into the daughter, so when they get reunited, Well, you get the picture. Very, very sneaky of him indeed. They produce these nanobots, but Bond rescues the daughter too before they get a chance to put them in her. In the final showdown, they get into a fight and Safin, with no other options left, uses these nanobots on Bond. Bond beats him up and asks who's the target, to which Safin says nothing, but they share an eye contact and Bond can quite easily guess who it's for. Then Bond kills Safin, gets all sad, and chooses to die. There you go. I'm not saying that's the way they should have done the movie, but it would have been a better way to improve the hero-villain dynamic. I'd quickly like to say that recently I've been struggling with YouTube. All of the time I'll have a great idea for a video and I'll know that you guys will enjoy watching it, but I can't make it because it's the kind of video that gets crushed in the algorithm. It's a bit of a bummer, to be honest, when that happens, but I'm happy to announce that I've recently been making these videos anyway, but they aren't on YouTube because I've been uploading them exclusively to Nebula. I put up my first there the other week all about world building and why video games are better at it than movies, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. If you guys aren't already signed up, you really should be, because you get to see tons of exclusive content like this from your favourite video essayists and education creators. Plus watch all of our existing videos in an ad-free experience. What really sweetens the deal here is how we've partnered up with CuriosityStream, the sponsor of today's video, where you can find a ton of great documentaries, and you can get both of these streaming services for the price of one. On there you can learn about the oddness of nature, new advancements in tech, the wonders of ancient civilizations, and everything in between. One documentary I watched there that I'd recommend you check out is The Worlds of Philip K. Dick. It's all about the author who wrote Minority Report and the book they based Blade Runner off of. It's packed full of storytelling insights, and I know you writers will find it useful because I did too. And if indulging your curiosities, learning about these interesting topics while also supporting me in watching my Nebula exclusive video essay, if all of that sounds good to you, then do click my link in the description and get 2 for 1 on these 2 great streaming services today. My agency's also worked out a deal where you guys can get 26% off the usual price, so it's only $14.79 a year. Yes, it's less than $15 a year for both of these services. It's a really good price. It's a bargain, like seriously, and do click my link down below if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for watching, do like the video, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.